So I want to thank everybody for actually staying through the afternoon, at least a little bit. Hopefully you got sugar or something to keep the energy flowing at least for a little while. My name is Joe Eikens here with Imagine Technologies. My role in the company, we'll get into more details later about all sorts of fun stuff, but I'm the director of building lifecycle solutions. So I run with the team that manages all of the consulting and training that we do for architects, engineers, contractors, facility managers. The whole, everything, anything dealing with buildings is me and my team. The whole purpose of us being here, this is, I don't read it unless you really want to, but this is the description that was in the program. The whole idea of, taking a look at the idea of technology, and what it really comes down to, if you boil it to the things that really matter, is this. We're taking a look at this whole idea of BIM, FM, and how do they come together? What's real? And we'll take a look at some of that stuff in practical, fundamental uses of FM in a BIM environment or BIM in an FM environment. It flows both ways that we're seeing today, and then projected some things into the future. But my hope is to spend most of our time talking about things that are either functionally being done today or can be done today using existing technology, and not being quite so much of a futurist vision, but practical and functional for what we have now. That's the overall idea. I've been with Imagine It for, it's about 17 and a half years now. Joined the company in '99. Prior to that, I went to school for architecture, never finished. I was one of those people that got disillusioned somewhere along the way and felt the lure of technology. So I ended up being CAD manager for a while, working my way through. We did, firm I was with before joining Imagine It, we did a lot of schools, healthcare centers, a lot of federal government projects. We were a Native American-owned firm. But through that time, I've just been working with the company to, at least my purpose there is to try and make sure that we have people with the knowledge and information to be able to be better tomorrow than they were today. It's really what it comes down to, and this is part of that. As we're going through this all, yes, we are a vendor. In the interest of full disclosure, we have a partnership with Autodesk, so we do work with Autodesk software. We have a partnership with Archibus, so we have that end of our practice. We've got a partnership with Leica Geosystems for laser scanning and other types of reality capture. There's a couple other places. Those are most of the ones that apply to buildings. Aside from that, just so you've got the better idea of who I am, where I'm coming from, my intent is to not really mention anything as far as a particular program or a particular vendor. There's a couple of places where the word Revit will come out, because if we talk about BIM in the United States, there's a 99.9% likelihood that you're talking about Revit, so I may as well be straight up with that. But the rest of this, when we're talking about facility systems, about other integrations, keeping it as generic, as vendor neutral as possible to try and make sure we're keeping this, not a sales pitch. It's really what we're going for. As a company, we do have a lot of divisions that work with different things. The ones that matter for us here is obviously, again, a buildings, engineering, and facility management department. In my case, I've been in the world, in this industry for long enough that I've got a lot of answers, a lot of understanding about what's going on, but I know I don't have it all. So I've got this group of people that I pull on when I need to. So there's a whole range of things that are out there. If I need to talk to somebody about computational fluid dynamics, going back to today's keynote speech where we had the operating room. Actually, well, we'll get to that later. But I don't have that knowledge. I'm not going to be that. I don't have a PhD in CFD or that level of mathematics. So we go to the people that do have that. So that's me, that's my company, that's the background that we've had. In the overall facilities world, we've been involved with facilities management for over 20 years. In fact, the first ever facilities project that we did was before that group was part of Imagine It. It was absorbed into the company at one point in time. And one of the big things that they did do is that first client of ours was Duke University. The issue that we had with Duke University is we were basically called in and won the job to validate existing space. They just wanted to see, where do we have, what do we have? And through the process, we ended up finding out that they had, I don't remember, but many thousands of additional square feet that they did not know existed. And those square feet were directly tied back to government grants, which means there was thousands upon thousands of square feet of wasted money from tiebacks to all those government things that were going on. So over the last 20 years, I think it's been calculated out that we have basically, just through that one site survey 22 years ago, we've saved Duke like $2 million, or gained them $2 million from probably what was like a $30,000 investment. So it's really good return on investment. But it's those types of things that shouldn't happen. We should know where all our space is. We should know all these things. We're just dealing with old documents, things like that. And this concept of BIM is one of those things that is supposed to bring us past that into having good information everywhere. So that's really what we're talking about. And I guess quick survey, there's two primary definitions of BIM that I'll tend to hear out there. One is that BIM will mean building information model or modeling. The other one is building information management. Does anybody here use the BIM of building information management? One? Okay. For context, because if I talk about BIM data and that references a virtual model, it's different information than if we're talking about the management of the model. So for this case, when we're talking about BIM, we're going to talk about BIM as a process. A model is a byproduct of the process. But BIM is the overall concept of how do we go about using it, what can we do with it, things like that. Beyond that, does anybody know who coined the word BIM? It was Autodesk Marketing. About 8 years ago, Autodesk acquired this company called Revit Technology Corporation. And they had to find a way to differentiate this Revit software that they just spent $33 million acquiring from this other thing that they had called AutoCAD Architecture. So somebody in the marketing department came up with this idea, we're going to call it BIM. And in the 8 years since then, it's taken off a life of its own. But that's where it really all came from, is this idea of a marketing ploy that's turned into something of an industry revolution. Fortunately, we've got control over that term now, and it's not driven by vendors and software creators, but it's a big thing out there. When we pull around and want to start looking at what can BIM and facilities do for us and why do we want to do it, it really comes back to the big picture of no matter what we're using, no matter how we're doing it, as a facilities manager, you really want to take these things, your design data, your processes, your facilities information, and you've got to use it all at various points in time in various percentages to just maintain your buildings, to get work done. Now, in that great grand world of BIM, we've probably all seen some type of a graph like this. Some iteration of this, but it's a great big circle of life of buildings that go from design through construction into management, and then the circle of life continues again, and right in the middle of it is this thing called BIM. And I don't agree with that. The whole idea of BIM, especially if we consider it a process, is probably outside of that circle. If you consider BIM to be the virtual model that gets generated, it's not the only source of information that we have for a building. You'll be getting feedback from various sensors that you might have in buildings, alarms tripping here and there, whatever it might happen to be. But it's only one source of information out of many. So at least in your heads, when we're looking at this, anytime we see that concept or that word of BIM, let's just replace it with a function of data. Because that's really what it comes down to, is we're going to be finding different ways to use data in ways that we didn't have before. Now, the title of the presentation talked about training the pink elephant. And not knowing how many people come with the right backgrounds or are of certain ages or anything else, the idea of pink elephant was, well, if you go back, the definition, I actually grabbed this one from Wikipedia, I think, but it's the whole idea of hallucinations. Pink elephants, they don't exist, right? That's the theory, right? So the function of BIM data working its way into active life inside a facilities management system doesn't really exist today much, does it? That's where we came up with the idea. But what I will propose as we're going through this is it's a little bit more real than we might think. There are going to be places where pink elephants really do exist in the world. They might be rare, but they really do exist. They're out there somewhere, and they're not all hallucinations. But we got to track it. We got to find it. We've got to get it through there. One of the ways to start pulling that through, that pink elephants really do exist, and then we can work with them, we can train them, Barnum and Bailey aside, is getting back to surveys. There's been a whole lot of information thrown at us over yesterday, today, through tomorrow morning about data of what's happening in our facilities. How do we make transitions? Doing the keynote addresses, different things of what people are doing or what future can be. Well, as Imagine It, we've started doing some different surveys and addressing questions to design partners of ours, construction partners of ours, and owner partners of ours. And we started coming back with some results. Now, this is a little bit of a sneak peek into some of this. We're putting the finishing touches on the white paper surrounding the results survey that we did. But if we look at it, hopefully it's reasonably readable by everybody, but the overall trends as we're looking at things is that the use and application of BIM is growing, stronger among the design side than on the owner side. But it is there, it is working, it is growing. Number of AE firms using BIM, and we were I guess, flexible with how are you defining what does using BIM mean. So that firm that has one project that was done in Revit, if they responded, yes, we're using BIM, okay, they might be using 99 other projects in AutoCAD, but they're using BIM, we'll accept that as their answer. We weren't questioning people as trying to get down that deep, but it's increasing. The number of owners requiring BIM on a project is increasing. You're probably seeing that for yourselves as we're working through it all. Familiarity with BIM is increasing. First time I ever did a BIM and FM presentation was at a conference about 5 years ago. And there were a lot of people really, really interested. And then for the next 3 years, we heard next to nothing. We're starting to come around more. Owners are coming around and saying, yes, I know what BIM is all about, or at least a definition of BIM, and not calling it the BIM or Revit or things like that. We're starting to get to a commonality in language as we're talking to each other. An interesting one, though, is, we're seeing collaboration improve, wonderful, but the use or the application of BIM, the model or the process, for energy efficiency, the number of people that are actively doing that has actually reduced in the last year. And it's an interesting thing, and we're not quite sure what to pull from that. Are people just less interested in energy efficiency, or it was really interesting for new buildings, but then the way that funding cycles go, we're not doing as many buildings, we're going into retrofit, but the retrofit is because things are needing repair, not because we're trying to get better energy efficiency. And we don't have any answer for that, but it's an interesting catch in there. Whereas designers are still trying to make sure that they increase the energy efficiency of new buildings and renovation construction, trying to get this AIA 2030 goal going on. It's interesting. But interest in the BIM data for facilities, obviously going up. You're here, you're part of that group. Knowledge as a barrier to BIM is still out there. I know that BIM exists, but what about it? We were just doing a class this week for some client of ours, out east from where we are now, was just a group of people coming in and saying, what is BIM all about? What is Revit all about? What does it mean to me? And going through knowledge transfer so people don't know what to do, so we can make adequate decisions. There's a certain number of people that still feel that cost is a barrier, and I think that's an absolute reality. And then there's a smaller number of people that say, my architect, my engineer, my contractor doesn't know what to give me. That one is a nice decline. There aren't many that were answering that, but it's nice to see that going away, because that to me means that from the owner-operator side, we're communicating better back to the designers and contractors. So all of these meaning, there really is a group of people out there that are actively using BIM in their day-to-day life. As far as real-world examples of what is happening, there's a few things that we've got to look through here. I'm not going to spell out each and every one of these, but in different areas of the life cycle of a building, through conceptual design, for some of that early energy analysis, BIM is actively being used. There's an example here of the Beck groups, saving money on the cost of construction by optimizing things early on. Through design development of evaluating things. NASA's building in Silicon Valley, just doing things that would reduce the overall power consumption of that building by, what was it, 30%. Going solar on the roof. What are the types of things that we can figure out early on in the design that have an impact on the ongoing management and maintenance of that building beyond construction? The big thing that most people look at when they think BIM is really in that design documentation. The idea of the model becomes wonderful, humongous, and we start putting in good data for the sake of construction, for the sake of management, better documentation, all sorts of things through there. But that's really the big thing that most people think about. Through construction, lots of places where you can see stories. If you Googled out, BIM and construction, you will see case study upon case study of people that are using BIM in construction. But that's usually right through here where things tend to fade away. If you look at most of the stories that are out there about the practical application, the practical use of BIM in various scenarios, it tends to fall off right about here. Because this is where we're done, we turn over keys to the building, and you get that now what part. There is a university that is not at this event who we're in contact with to talk about what do we do with their BIM data, because they specified BIM, had a good set of standards, a good execution plan. The buildings were built better. They were built for less money, fewer RFIs, all these wonderful things that are supposed to happen happened. And then they got this model, didn't know what to do with it, and put it up on the shelf. We're now 3-4 years later. It's irrelevant data. That doesn't match the reality of their structures today. So while they had a really good plan on the use and application of BIM through construction, there was no plan on taking it to the next step. And if you look at some of the studies you might see going into the life cycle costs of different buildings, there's some examples here. Shanghai Tower construction. All the things that we did to make this building better. Cool. If we look at the GSA has some good initiatives with the use of BIM, but in either of these, if you look at the details of the text, it's like we're gonna use BIM for this. That's our plan. We're planning on doing something else. A lot of the things that you'll find for stories that are talking about the life cycle use of BIM are future casting. It doesn't have to be, but that's what you'll find in a lot of those different stories. Going back to the actual uses of BIM, there's plenty of things that we can do with that data today to turn those things in from a we will be doing it to we actually are using it. This is the same operating room that Chuck Meese was showing earlier. We did the work, so there's that part. But there's different things where if we take the fact that we've got a physical model that we can analyze, we can evaluate, then we could start doing things like up here we were saying, well, we need to add in this shipping and receiving area, we need to get some bigger overhead doors. But we want to keep the air inside comfortable for the people that are working without adversely affecting our energy bills. So what can we do to analyze this virtual building, those things out, so we know we've got the right solution in place when we go construct it. This one was for a tennis stadium. Again, human comfort coming into play. Of going through and identifying what do we do for airflow across equipment so we're not blowing hot air where it doesn't need to go. All these things that are applications of BIM that we can do today by just going through some of those various analysis components. But all those, while they are things we can do today, there's a challenge that we've got with a lot of it. And part of that challenge is to understand how do we ask for and receive the right data so that we can put it into an application. The geometry that we saw on just that previous slide, that just comes from modeling something accurately, getting good 3D data that can be any surface. We saw it happening with the point cloud. Anything like that can work just fine, but if we're going to take the data and put it into application inside our building, there's really three major things that we've got to work through. The first thing we have to ask, and we've thrown these types of questions out there for a couple years now, but we need to figure out who's going to use the data. If we've got all this information that's going to be in a model, who is going to use it? Is it you? It may or may not be you. Is it going to be the person holding a wrench, your building engineers, that are going down to service something, a light fixture, a pump, a whatever. Are those the people that are going to be the end users of this real data? Chances are it's more of that level person than it is the traditional facility manager or department head. They'll have to sign off on the budget, but it's somebody else that's going to use the data. So when we know who's really going to be using the data, who's impacted by this type of information, then we need to turn around and say, well, great, what information do they need? Not only do we know now who's going to be the downstream beneficiary, but we're talking to that person and saying, hey, Mary, if you're going to be changing out these light fixtures, what information do you need to know to make your life better? Part numbers, ballast information, what's it going to be? Find that information, get to those people and say, what do you need to know? And the last thing we've got to ask is who's going to maintain it? I was talking to a government owner last week, and we were saying, you can have anything put into this Revit model that you want to. Anything is possible. You just create a new parameter, a new data field, fill in the information, life is good. And their question back to me was, well, why don't we ask for everything? And the reason for that is maintenance. If you're not going to maintain it, what's the purpose in recording it anyway? Because then it'll become a piece of data that is not going to be able to be trusted. And people start wondering, if I can't trust this data, why can I trust that data? So we have to keep this streamlined to just those pieces of information that matter to us, that matter to the person that's going to be using the data. If you can't answer this question, go back up to the top and ask again. Now, there's not necessarily going to be a deep discussion here of how many ways can we have whomever it is to maintain that information. That goes back to talking to FM systems, what are your data entry possibilities? Talking to Archibus, what are your data entry possibilities? IBM, getting with them, getting with Famous, getting with whomever it is, getting to your homegrown piece that Bob in the corner programmed out. What are the different ways that we can get to entering data? Is it going to be on a mobile device? Is it going to be on a laptop? Is it going to be a paper form that somebody transcribes? All those things are possible just so long as it happens. That's the biggest thing. Just make sure it happens, it gets maintained. From here, if we know what information is going to be out there, and we're talking about combining BIM and facilities management, there are a couple areas that we can start to divide the building out into. And probably the best fit for any of these opportunities is going to be space management. Space management and a virtual model kind of go hand in hand. There's some quirks and exceptions that we'll get into in a minute, but this is the easy, low-hanging fruit. If we think about it from an AutoCAD standpoint, you would typically go through, you've got your floor plans, and then you start creating polylines that represent the different rooms and the departments and the areas that you want to take care of. The whole idea of BIM is that those areas are a byproduct of just modeling. You let it go. But it's not always that simple. We still have to give it some thought. We still have to think about, how am I doing this? Am I measuring my areas to center lines of walls? Am I measuring areas to outside face of walls? Or how am I doing this? Do we have internal chargebacks? There are things, this is the easy low-hanging fruit, but it's not necessarily an easy button. If it's not an easy button, then why do we bother doing it? It's because of cost savings. There was a study done with Carolina's Healthcare. I don't know how many people are aware of this one, but this was a few years back. But they calculated things out and figured out that the speed at which they could catalog square footage was roughly twice as fast using a BIM process versus using traditional CAD. And there's all sorts of things that go through here. It's the process of saying, well, how do I create the polylines versus how in Revit do I go create a room, click, 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 click. Cataloging space was that much faster. So if you take the idea of time and time management into this, that starts adding into dollars. We were able to start managing that facility faster, better, because we got the information input sooner. Pretty quick, pretty straightforward. Now, in many cases, if you're getting a model from contractor, designer, whomever it's going to be, it might be that this 10,000 square feet per hour is even off the board because you've got all of it the moment you receive the model. The question is, at that point, is how do I integrate it with my facility system? That's a couple slides from now. From there, we do have to have that discussion of how do we measure space? How do we measure area? Just a quick show of hands. How many people here are familiar or have used Revit any? So most of the room. Cool. So the big thing is, if I was saying that these are room objects, and we've got room objects that can have area measured here versus areas, and I use that word loosely because Revit has areas, Revit has spaces, Revit has rooms. They're all different. But to here, does everybody know how you can make that change? If you needed to, do you know how to use area objects to get things, the square footage reported in ways that vary according to, floor area versus office space versus, there's different things. So that whole idea of it's easy low-hanging fruit, but in technical terms, we've got to make sure we understand in Revit world, are we talking about rooms? And if we're talking about rooms, there's this neat little option we can say, where am I measuring, how am I measuring the square footage? It's cool. Am I talking about engineering spaces? If somebody says, great, I'll give you the engineering spaces, or I'll give you the spaces, stop right there. That's not what you want. It doesn't do you any good. If we're talking about area objects, those can work really well. There's facilities programs out there that use room objects only. There's facility programs that use room objects and area objects. I'm not aware of any facilities program that uses the engineering space. So take care of that. And when we're doing that, also make sure you've got your terminology right, because most of those facilities programs will call it space. But the facility space is not the Revit space, so we've got to do these translations in our head. But it can be as simple as that. We just need to know. Area objects can very quickly and easily start splitting things out according to your rental chargebacks if that's what you're going through. We just need to know that you've got to do it, and that's what you're going for. The second piece, and most of the time we'll get to this through talking about connecting BIM and FM technically, but this is easy. In the grand scheme of things, if you have a BIM-aware facility system, it's most of the time just a matter of click here and ta-da. We've got my rooms published within a matter of seconds. It's cool stuff. The second part beyond that starts to get into asset management. This is also a fairly easy thing to do if those assets have been placed in the model. If I'm tracking, this is a quick floor plan, and we've got a dot where different types of furniture is at, using a system to be able to view the data. But if I've got all of this, I know I can track all of these pieces of furniture and get that put into the facility system. Easy, low-hanging fruit. But if I've got something in this room 113, it's a big common area. If I had a piece of equipment in there that never made it into my model, then there's nothing to push into the facility system. So we've got to make sure that everything is accounted for in one way or another. And in the same sense, if you don't care about tracking chairs, don't have them in the model. There's going to be not-for-profits that have to check every single item. There's zoos that we've worked with that have barcodes on every single folding chair because they need to track every single asset that they have. We've got other people that say, yeah, I care about space and the artwork on the wall. And that's it. So we don't bother trying to track other pieces of furniture, other pieces of equipment, because that's not what they want. It goes back to those three questions. Who's going to use this data? What do they need to have? Who's going to maintain it? So if it exists, we can tell you where it is inside the building. That information can make its way into the facility system as well. And we start pulling that stuff forward. It ends up being fairly easy in the general concepts until we get to this concept of field mapping, database work. This is where some things maybe aren't quite the easy button. It gets to be a little bit closer to rocket science, but it doesn't have to be. There are going to be times, if you're working with a contractor, that they will say, hey, I've got a unique equipment ID that I've placed in every single one of these. I'm using software X to track my issues. While I did that, I plugged in all this information. So you've got a unique ID for every single one. And what's most common among contractors is they'll get something like this. This is an example. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but it's something where they're saying, I'm going to give you a unique ID number That's going to be related to the level of the building, the equipment category that it is. Is it a pump? Is it furniture? Is it whatever? And then it's also going to be an item that's going to say what room is it in. This is what that code is. So it's saying, this is a code here, LI22135, that says I am a chair in room 215, and I'm chair number 5 in room 215. And for the contractor, that's great, because when they're done, they can go and look in room 215, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chairs, they're great. And then they leave, somebody comes in behind them, grabs that chair, and goes somewhere else. So we just got to be careful to understand where the person is that's giving you the information is coming from, so that we can interpret and work with them better. Now, really what you want to do, and hopefully many people are going that way, is tie it all to a barcode of something, QR code, something that you tag onto that, especially for the mobile assets inside your facilities. That way it doesn't matter. Maybe you get this number as you receive it. That's fine. But then that number is tied to a QR code, a barcode, and that becomes the real thing that you start scanning, because it doesn't matter what room it's in. You scan that item, say, okay, this is what it is, where it's at. That get logs back into the database. Life is good. But just know that the people that are delivering you this information have a different mindset. In the same sense, if you don't have we'll say a BIM standard or a project execution plan yet, be wary, and I've heard this said by a few people even this week, be wary of having the architect, the contractor build that standard for you, because I think this was, I forget his name, the guy from AECOM, saying that when you get them building the standard for you, you get what they want to give you, not what you want to receive. And so you'll get this as your unique item code that doesn't work once somebody moves that piece of equipment. It doesn't work so well. If we've got all these issues, why bother with it? Well, again, it comes back to money. There's, again, a study here done with integration and commented things out, so we're not trying to throw in particular items, but we figured Maricopa County eliminated 2 years of work in capturing information. I think that might be a little bit excessive, but that's what they said. I'll accept it. I'm not sure how they were capturing data. It could have been a horribly inefficient process, and then they turned around and got something from the get-go. So normally this type of building would have taken 2 years to catalog all the information. I can see where it's possible. It seems a bit excessive, but still, even if it's half that, to be able to have all of your information done in 1 year's savings is huge, because you're able to start managing that information ahead of time. Start working through that. Energy management is the third one we were looking at. This gets to be a little bit more future cast, and also depends on what you're doing for managing your buildings. Is energy analysis something that you're actively doing or not? If you are, and you've got a model, there's a lot of really cool things we can do. Whether it's software from Autodesk, software from other vendors, there's all sorts of tools that are out there that can take the virtual model that you've created and start analyzing it. Not to be able to tell you specifically that you're going to be charged 9 cents per square foot in heating and cooling costs. That, if you ever get somebody that says that, I won't say walk out and just leave them behind, but it's got to be something close to that, because nobody can do that. Energy costs change. Analyses give you ranges, not exacts. So what you end up doing is you taking that information and you do comparative analysis of what if scenarios. What if we change the glass out from what it is now, single pane, to a low E glass? What happens? What if we go through and start replacing the ceiling? Or sorry, roof information. What if we go through and start redoing X, Y, and Z inside a building? Do comparative analysis. So say doing this will save you a certain percent. There's, again, plenty of tools out there that do that, but saying, yeah, if I change my HVAC system, I drop my energy cost by about that much as a comparative analysis. And we still have to be careful, though. There's a client of ours that was giving me a story, this was about 10 years ago. They did a study of a gymnasium, and they compared heating and cooling costs before and after a roof replacement. And after the roof replacement, so it was a leaky, bad roof, all sorts of horrible things were going on, but once they replaced it, had a nice, tight system, their heating and cooling costs went up. And they spent weeks weeks trying to figure out what in the heck was going on. As it turns out, I don't know how long it took them, it was at least weeks or months of time before somebody finally clued into what was going on, but the light fixtures that they had inside this gymnasium gave off a whole lot of heat. And in the winter months, that heat helped warm the space. In the summer months, the heat went out through the leaky roof. Once they sealed everything up, that heat wasn't leaking out in the summer anymore, and so they had extra cooling costs that they didn't expect to have. So even something like this isn't going to be exact. We've got to be able to take real-world scenarios into consideration. They're close, but give you some ideas. So that's 3 major areas that are happening today. People are using BIM for energy management, testing out and seeing what happens, what if we start doing X, Y, and Z in a renovation project. People are doing it for asset management today. People are doing it for space management today. The way we go about doing it really falls into 2 different buckets. The best way to go about it, and there's a few that are mentioned here, there's however many thousands of different possible systems out there, but the best way to go about it is, if possible, to use a direct Revit integration with your existing facility software. These ones do. Others do as well. Famous, I know, has a ability to read and work with Revit data. Any homegrown item could. There's a programming interface for Revit. It's just a matter of does it exist or not. But the best way to go about it is just a direct connection. Click a button, let the data from Revit go into your facility system. Click another button, let the data from your facility system come back into Revit. That's the easiest and best way to go, because it's direct. The trouble is, especially considering that we're on that early edge of BIM and FM integration, is you really have to know what that tool does do and what it does not do. For example, and I'll pull a particular software out here, the Archibus tool has a direct integration between Revit and their database. When you click the button that says go, one of the things it does is it adds about half a dozen parameters into your room that you may or may not want, that you may or may not ever use. Turns out that you can't delete all of those parameters once you've been added into your drawing. There's one of them at least that can't seem to go away. They did something with the coding, it just doesn't go away. It could be a problem, depending on what you've got. If you don't use those default parameters and you remap it to show something else instead, then, well, you've got this parameter hanging out there in nowhere land. Somebody's going to eventually ask, what's this for? Start filling that out instead of what they should fill out. We could have a problem. But know what the capabilities and limitations are. Is it a one-way push, or is it a bidirectional link? What's happening? So understand what those capabilities are so that you use it appropriately. Each one of those that we were looking at does it differently. Know what's happening. The other thing is, we're not getting into that in this session, but make sure you've got good Revit data. I know there were, Autodesk did a session about don't use your as-builts for facilities management. I believe there's one other that was talking about how we get data in and out. There's different presentations we've done on how do you prepare a model for facilities management. Garbage in, garbage out. This is actually all links that you could find out who this came from were taken away. But we used some tools to help a client of ours who was working on a project to pull information from Revit and start cataloging things because they had a mess on their hands. They had about 20 Revit models for this project and didn't know where anything was. So one of the things we did is we went through, in each of the different 20 models, we chunked through it all and went through different coding and said, okay, find where every sheet, printed sheet, exists. And this is a partial capture of that. There were over 1,585 sheets in the set, and they were spread across these 20 files. So we said, what's the sheet name? What file did it come from? What's the sheet number? And we found out there were places, like right here, there were 3 LS0000 sheets. And each of them had a slightly different name. Pretend you don't see that. And nobody knew which was the right one. So is the right LS sheet from this file, that file, the other one, the record document model, the fit-out model? So we did some things to start cataloging where these repeated items were. But then it took a human being saying, okay, well, what's this, what's that, making a comparison and saying, okay, we're keeping that one, and let the rest go. But it took a human being to filter through it once we were able to narrow that selection set from 2,000 some odd sheets to a smaller list. In the same sense, the data needs to be the same as well. Again, is the name of the sheet going to be something like that? Are you going to use an ampersand or the word and? For a human, we interpret that fine. A computer doesn't. When we're putting in a sheet number, is this going to be a text field, or if it's just purely a number, is it an integer? As far as human beings go, we don't care. As far as Revit goes, it doesn't care, but a database cares. Your facilities cares. Your facilities database cares whether or not it's a text field or an integer field or a number field. They are all different and we have to be the same. There's different things we can do to qualify what's happening inside the model. Various tools that are out there to make sure it's all good data, but you have to do that before you go in. Before you start hitting that connector to say, push my data in, we've got to validate it. Before you go the next route, we've got to make sure the data is good. So if you're using a system, and it might be one of those systems from the previous slide, it's just a version that doesn't have Revit integration, then really the next best way we have to start integrating and getting Revit data and facilities data coming together is going to be COBie. Is anybody here not familiar with COBie? Cool. I mean, the whole idea with COBie is that it's just, COBie's a data format. It's not a graphic format, it's a data format. And it's a format that has every possible element of anything that might potentially exist somewhere inside your building. You've got to filter through that, narrow down COBie so it's got just the data fields that you care about by going through and asking the right people, what do you need and how are we going to manage it. Once that's done, you get something really messy that looks kind of like this. Maybe not colored, but it's probably about as messy as that. And the next step, map fields. This is the COBie data field. This is what my facility system is looking for. We just make that mapping as you work your way on down. When that's done, because you have data standards, you click the go button and the magic happens. It's the theory. If you've got good data, the theory holds up true. What we end up finding out more often than not is as we're going through this process, we're doing this in a sandbox system, and we click the go button, we test it, and something breaks. Because what you thought was good data wasn't. You had one piece you missed. It had a text field, and over here was an integer. We got to fix that. We got to make it better. Go through the process again until we've got that good data import. Make things happen. Now, generally speaking, if you've got that good validated COBie data, if you've got good validated Revit data, that integration through either a direct piece or a COBie intermediary works fine. The one thing that we'll see is if you have a direct import, a direct link through an add-in into Revit or something like that, it's more likely that you'll have at least the potential of being in a situation that can round trip the data. Push it to your facility system, suck it back into Revit, push it to facility, suck it back. Make sure you're only doing that with the information that matters. I would argue that maintenance information does not belong in the Revit model. I know other people that argue otherwise. Figure out what's right for your system, for your environment, and run with it. Take it. If you talk to Autodesk, I'm sure they would probably be much more inclined to say everything should belong in the Revit model because that can be your source of truth for all things good and holy. We're allowed to disagree. That's a good thing about life. Now, the challenge that we'll often have is going to be twofold from here. We've gone through and said, yes, we've got good data. Woohoo! We figured out either through COBie or direct add-in how we can push and pull data. Cool. Problem number one is that more often than not, you're going to be running into systems where you'll have some BIM data and some CAD data. And we'll have to figure out how do we work through that hybrid system. My position on it is it's not a problem. I don't know how many people have been going through that or are working through it. It's a baby step process. If you're already, and most everybody here raised their hand, you're already working in the Revit direction and somehow, you know already you've got some Revit data, you've got some CAD data. If somebody's asking for a floor plan, you can give them a floor plan. One of these came from Revit, one came from AutoCAD. You can guess, and you've got a 50% chance of being right. I mean, your odds are good, but it doesn't matter. For the people that are consuming the data, it doesn't matter if it came from a Revit model or if it came from an AutoCAD model or an AutoCAD model or whichever way it is, so long as they've got the information they need to be able to maintain the building, to be able to get work done. And in fact, we've got some people that are working in this type of mode. You bring in your AutoCAD data and you model on top of it. Hopefully you've done some dimensional verification along the way, and let it ride. This data, it's sitting in Revit as a background to make sure that the graphics are all right, but maybe some of this information is feeding your floor plans and your facility system. Maybe it's all coming from Revit. All of those are possible. All those are fine. Just over time, we'll have something that's changing. I've talked to people this week that are, over the summer, putting armies of people together to start modeling up their buildings into Revit. It's great. I've worked with other universities, hospitals, owners of different sorts that are saying, yeah, we're on about a 20-year plan to get everything converted because we've got an existing campus. We are not planning on doing any real major renovations for the foreseeable future, so why bother going through some effort to make things happen? All of those are fine. It's a matter of getting the data from the appropriate place to where it's got to go. One thing I will say, especially if you're going to go to an environment like this, where you've got some blend of Revit, some blend of CAD coming together, really, really, really do pay attention to this itty-bitty checkbox when you're bringing in your AutoCAD files. When you're linking AutoCAD into Revit, you've got this thing here. Use it, please. Or communicate back to your design and construction partners to use it, please. The whole idea here is if I bring in an AutoCAD file, let it appear in just the one drawing, the one view that I'm bringing it into. If I bring in a floor plan into level 1 of a building, let it exist only there, not there and in all sections, in all elevations, in all 3D views, in all everythings. Slows down your computer, slows down the model, makes everything ugly. I was just working with a file last week that did not do that, and we ended up deleting everything and reinserting from scratch. So if you weren't already aware, now you are, but whenever possible, do fill in that, please. There's more we could get into with best practices related to AutoCAD and Revit. That's another session, another day. That's just the one that I'll throw out here right now because it's pertinent to what we're talking about. The other part then, so one hybrid environment is what do we do with the CAD data and Revit data sitting side by side? My proposition is that it's not a problem. Let's just let it ride. The other one is how do we round trip things? If this is the theoretical circle of life of some sort, at some point in time, you get data, you link it to your facility system. And I'm truly saying link here because we're talking about that bidirectional environment. If it's just a one-way push, this doesn't exist. There is no circle of life. You push it once and everything's separated from that point forward. That's fine. But if you're going for the circle of life, we get that, we manage it, we issue the model to different partners for a major renovation, we get some data back, and then we get to this point. This is the spot that nobody has an easy button for. This one is time, effort, and labor. And there's nothing else I can tell you about that that's going to make your life easier other than if it's an entire building that's getting shut down for the summer, that actually is not so bad because you're just completely replacing one virtual model with another. But if it's just the west wing of the classroom annex, it gets to be more difficult. And there's no easy way about it. There's going to be some level of opening up both files, copy from one, paste into another, delete. If you wanted to be uber formal, excuse me, you could re-demolish things, you could go through all sorts of stuff. But the other part is when you do that paste, it gets to a spot where that object is a new object. It doesn't have any link back to the old record. Depending on your facility system, you can repair that, but this step is manual effort. This step getting better is incumbent upon the facility's software providers to get a better solution. Maybe Autodesk fits in there to some extent too, but right now we're early enough on, there's no easy way about that one. We can build up workflow processes and structures of how it gets done, but if it's a major renovation, it's going to take somebody a week to re-merge all of that data. and I'm sorry. But that's what we've got. And then it's just lather, rinse, repeat. Do it over and over and over again. Remembering that, at least in Joe's world, this idea of BIM being the center of the universe is not true. It is one data source among many. And that becomes a thing that we consider as part of what we manage on a facility, not the thing that we're managing, despite what any vendor, anybody, anywhere might be saying. And then from there, we can say, yes, I found the pink elephant. Because it is real. Photographed in March of 2016. So that is what I had to say here. Oh, no, I'm sorry, there is one more thing. In large part, we agreed that the term for BIM was Building Information Model, all due respect. I pulled this from a colleague of mine. Just say no to BIM model. It's a pet peeve of ours. It's like ATM machine, it's this repeating. And well, at one point in time, we were giving away Starbucks cards anytime one of my colleagues said BIM model, and we ran out within the first 30 minutes. Have fun with it, but let's take it. Open it up here for any questions. Q&A time.
Well, I'm going to go on record by saying the merge problem is 99% of the problems that I deal with.
Yes.
You know, we talk about this data in the package, and that's great, and it makes the new buildings easy, but most of what we do is not new buildings on a day-to-day basis. So that problem needs to be fixed, and I agree, it needs to happen at the AEC, the industry level. We've got to figure something out.
And yeah, the merge problem is the biggest issue. I mean, the whole idea of circle of life, nobody really addresses it because there is no solution, and from a software vendor standpoint, you're not going to talk about something unless you have a solution for it. So it gets glossed over. There are ways by which, again, you're going to do a copy-paste to get information in. Sometimes, if it's this minor renovation, then you just make that change on your own. But those big ones, it's a grunt effort move process. I wish it was better.
If you got DAV boxes that are tagged in the room below, with that room now changed with the renovation, I mean, so many factors. Somehow the data needs to manage itself in some automated fashion.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we can look to do, and in some cases it could work, in some cases it blows up in your face, but if we're managing things by the barcode, and the barcode is that key field that matters, then the barcode moves with that thing wherever it goes. And if we're replacing the HVAC system in a wing, it gets all new equipment, so we get all new barcodes, so all the old stuff does get decommissioned in some form or another, and you do get all new stuff. But getting that into the model is not the easy process. If we're looking at something where we're doors, you've got some groups of doors that get put away forever because they're junk. You get some that we'll try to reuse somewhere else. Try. Hopefully they don't damage it too much in the demolition process. But those things, if they do have a barcode, then it follows the barcode. The door was next to room 317, now it's over next to 472.
Yes.
We can get some associations there because what matters is that piece of paper with a barcode on it, which is tied to the record inside the database, not what room am I next to. It still gets to be a data process by which you say, depending on your situation, am I going to say, well, this barcode's now on that door, and you manually inserted that information, or the designers, contractors did it for you, and then you hit a sync button, and all the door information gets back into the database? Or is that a spot where I know that's my door, and I've got to do some manual data manipulation to get it ready for that sync back? It depends on the situation you're in.
Well, what I would like, I mean, I don't know how to solve the problem, but you know, the barcodes, even though they're still effective, it's kind of amazing that they're still being used. They're kind of a primitive way to communicate information. You know, it's a one-way identification code. I think in this day and age, especially with Wi-Fi covered spaces, you know, we should have tagging systems that have two-way communications to them. That door should be able to tell us that it moved down the hall.
I will not disagree. It becomes, most often it becomes a funding issue. If you haven't looked at it yet, there's a video out there for what's called the Edge building. Has anybody heard of this one? Google it. It's up on or YouTube. Go to YouTube and search for the Edge building, EDGE. It's in Norway, or somewhere reasonably close to that. It is probably today one of the most technologically advanced buildings that exists in the world. And it's going to be doing exactly some things like that, where it's, if you need to come in and you're going to work, you walk in the door, and based off of an app that's on your phone, it knows who you are, where you are. You can walk in the door, and you get a message on your phone saying, hey, today this is your office. And you go to that spot, and there's your place to be your office. It's turning, all the light fixtures are connected through Cat 5, maybe Cat 6, Cat whatever. They're network aware. So everything in this building is interconnected. Now, I don't know if they have the equivalent of a RFID code on the doors, but there's a lot that's going in. It's its own self-contained piece. It is, I believe, 100% carbon neutral on its own site. So take a look at that. It's the idea of things that can be done if you've got money and budget and time to do it, which is always the problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's going upon your point here in the red striped shirt. I didn't catch his name. But that technology does exist. We went on the tour here in the campus to go upon your point. I don't know, go on the tour of kind of the buildings. We talked about the water irrigation system where they have mesh sensors. So yeah, there is equipment with, like Joe said, with the money, two-way communication. If you want to have the devices tell you where it's at, it can be done. Like the lunch meeting that we had today, the medical equipment talks to the OEM company and says, I need to be serviced without any human interaction. So yeah, it does exist. I used to be in that Internet of Things, Zigbee mesh technology, smart building automation, asset management control. So there are possibilities, but I think we're all under a money doesn't grow on tree budget scenarios.
It's got to be a fraction of a cent solution because you need to do it on everything. You know, you can't Cat 5 every asset
No.
that you have,
No.
but there's got to be some, and it's out there, some solution will serve.
There was a technology conference that Autodesk put on 3 weeks ago, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, and everybody when they came in got a badge that was printed from a 3D printer, and embedded in it was a chip that tracked where they physically were every moment that they were going around and being in this conference. So when you walked into room 5 to get into that session, it knew you were in room 5 and you were sitting in this spot. So there's incredible things that can be done, and if we're doing it through a 3D printer, it may not mean it's cheap, but it means that the technology is progressing to a spot where we're getting close.
And if we're putting them in badges, I mean, you
Yeah.
can put them on your fixtures. And if a fixture gets thrown in the trash can, it no longer registers on your database anymore.
Right.
It should be as simple as that. And I think if we can get to that point, then we've really got ourselves something we can work
And
with.
we are going that direction. I can't forecast when it'll be. Is it 5 years? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 2? But we're moving
Two
there.
would be good.
2's good. Yeah.
On your CAD link short discussion,
Yeah.
did something change that you're aware of between Revit 2014 and 2016 R2 that you're aware of? Because we did exactly what you told us not to do, because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And things were quite rosy. And typically what we did is after the models were assembled, we detached all of those links, but left them there so that you could flip them back on if you had the need to.
Oh, the AutoCAD stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we could flip them on or off and everything was cool, but when we made that migration to 2016 R2, some really freaky things started happening with these CAD links. And the settings, you look at them and you go, why would you have this view be a background to itself and things like that? It's kind of just jumbled the whole system in terms of your visibility graphic controls.
Yeah, I think it was in 2016, we'll call it R1.
Maybe that was when it happened.
In 2016, Autodesk made a significant change in how they read and wrote DWG files. They made a major change to the underpinnings of the software at that point, so yes. That sort of thing of how we deal with AutoCAD data has been a best practice in Revit since a long time ago.
Just
To bring, well, the technical piece would be when you bring in CAD data do it current view only, and place it into its own work set. So that you can control visibility through the work set part, which gives better performance controls over just visibility graphics.
Don't get us started on
Yeah.
accents. That's another whole world.
So that has been an acknowledged best practice since like Revit R2. So way back time, just because Revit and AutoCAD data, it reads and writes fine, but there are certain times at which it will slow down your system.
Well, you got the ear of the Autodesk folks, and I'm sick of beating up on poor old Chuck. But you got to get some of their best practices stuff out on their sites cleaned up.
Okay.
Like where they retired the application manager and then replaced it with the desktop. But if you Google the desktop manager, I think that's its current name, you will get all kinds of hits for the application manager, and you can't decipher which is your proper source of information to run with.
Yeah, and the current model best practices guide that they have, I think, still references Revit 2006. So there's
That's not good.
yes, there definitely are issues. I will not deny that. Anything else? Cool. Well, I've got 4:17. Thanks for the extra 2 minutes of your time. And if you have questions, anything else comes around, find us. We're here to help out and keep building the shop.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.